All right, for the next section here is 3.2. 3.2 refers to what we call least common multiples. Okay, so we have least common multiples here, and it says find the least common multiple for the following pairs of numbers. So I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this. What we mean by least common multiples is I want to take the multiples of, say, the number 4. So 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12, 16, 20, 24. I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. I can do the same thing with 6. 6 times 1 is 6, times 2 is 12, 18, 24, and 30. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for the least common multiple. So I notice in those two rows I have numbers in common. I have the numbers 12 in common. I also have the numbers 24 in common. But the least common multiple is saying, what's the first number we have in common? Well, that happens to be 12. 12 is the smallest number that they both have in common. Now, you can always make a list like this, and this works really well. The other thing I want to point out, I'm going to do the same thing for my numbers 9 and 15. Now, I may not want to take 9 and start multiplying that, or maybe 15 and start multiplying that out. But if you pull up your multiplication table, let me see if I can do that. All right, here we go. I want you to look, and I'm going to kind of scroll this down a little bit so I can see both my numbers in here. So here's my number 9, here's my number 15, and I want to sort of look over here to the side, and I want to see, is there a number that they both have in common? What's the first number they both have in common? Well, the first thing I notice is 45. So that's my least common multiple. So I'm going to come back over here. That's why I was telling you all earlier that the chart is real helpful. It's visual. You can see that, right? Otherwise, I'd be taking my calculator and multiplying these numbers out. But if I have my chart handy, I can find it right away. So the least common multiple between 9 and 15 is 45. Now, I'm going to scroll down to my next couple of problems because I want to show you yet another way to do these problems. Now, the chart is really helpful, guys. And my first recommendation is always going to be to use the chart. I think probably 80% of the time you'll be able to find your least common multiple by using the chart. But I want to point something out. If I pull up my chart again, my chart only goes up to 20. I don't have 21 on here. Now I could go and find another multiplication chart because I do have 18, but I don't have 21. So I'm going to show you another way to do this, and this way always works. So if you remember earlier in chapter 2 we talked about the prime factorization. So I'm going to find the prime factorization of 18. So I know that 18, when I multiply it out, is 2 times 9. 9 is 3 times 3. So 18 has 1 2 and 2 3s. Now I know I could write them using exponents, but for the sake of looking at the numbers, it's going to be so much easier if I actually write them all out. Now I'm going to do the same thing for my number 21. 21 only breaks down into 3 and 7. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at these numbers here, and I'm going to look at these numbers here. Every number that I see in my factored form, this number here and that number there, is going to have to be used. Now the question is, how many 2's do I need, how many 3's do I need, how many 7's do I need? So in this box right here, I'm going to write out my least common multiple. Looking at this number here and this number here, I only have 1 2. So I'm going to write the number down 2 once. Here I have 2 3's. Here I only have 1 3. Because I have more 3's here, I need to write down both 3's. In my number 21, I have a 7. I don't have any 7's here, but because I have that 1 7, I need to write that out. Now, I'm going to go ahead and write my final answer over here. I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to multiply my numbers out, and so I'm going to take 2 times 3 times 3 times 7, and I'm coming up with 126. You know what, let me write that again so we can see that a little bit better. Tell you what I'll do, I'll write it in red. 126. All right, I'm going to do the same thing for my next number here. And if you notice in this next one, I have 3 numbers. I have 4, I have 14, and I have 20. So let me get back my black pen So 4 I know is 2 times 2. 14, I want to make sure it looks like 2 times 2, not 22. 14 is 2 times 7. 20 is 4 times 5, but 4 can be broken down into 2 times 2 times 5. Okay, so I'm going to look at each of these numbers here. Alright, notice I'm putting them in boxes. It helps me organize my information that way. Alright, so what I need to do is I need to ask myself, which one of these numbers has the most number of 2's? Well, if you notice, both the number 4 and the number 20 have 2 2's. So I need 2 2's. Now, this one only has 1 2, so I don't need to write it. I need to write it where I have the most 2's. I also have the number 5, which I'm going to need. And I also have the number 7, which I'm also going to need. And I'm going to start multiplying. So I'm going to go ahead and take my calculator, and I'm going to take 2 times 2 times 5 times 7, and I'm coming up with 140. And that's my least common multiple. Alright, continuing here with 3.2. The next problems here say to write each fraction as an equivalent fraction with the given denominator. So essentially what that means I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to do a little stare and compare. I'm going to, number 1, I'm going to look at the number that I have on the bottom right here, which is 7. Look at the number that I have on the bottom right here, which is 35. And I'm going to ask myself, what did I multiply 7 by to get 35? Oh, well, I multiplied that by 5. If I multiply the bottom number by 5, I need to also do the same thing on the top. So 5 times 4 is 20. And that's essentially what it is I'm looking for here. I'm asking myself, what number did I multiply on the bottom here to get this number here? And then I also have to do that same number on the top. So in the next problem, I have the number 10, I have the number 70. Well, I know I multiplied that by 7, so I'm also going to go 7 here. 7 times 9 should give you 63. So if we take a look at these next problems, the first one I notice here I have 6. Remember, if I want to think of 6 as a fraction, I'm going to think of that as 6 over 1. So what did I multiply 1 by to get 10? Oh, well, I had to multiply it by 10. So I'm going to multiply that by 10 as well. That's going to give me 60. I want to give you all a minute to think about this problem here and this problem here. You might want to hit pause because in a couple of seconds I'm going to go ahead and fill in the answers, but I want you to think about it. If you multiplied this one here, by 7 and that one by 7, you should have 21. If you multiplied this one here by 25, that one by 25, you should end up with 50. All right, so for the next problem that I have here, it just says we're going to go ahead, we have the types of goods sold by non-store retailers. So we have books and magazines, clothing, accessories, computer hardware, computer software, drugs, health, and beauty aids. And here it says this is the column that represents the fractions of the goods that were sold online. So we had 43 out of 50. Now here, all it's asking me to do is to write this with an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. All that's telling me that they were asking me to do is put a 100 down here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to stare and compare. So I multiplied that one by 2, so I'm going to multiply this one by 2. So 50 times 2 is 100. 43 times 2 should give me 86. If you notice here, this is telling me to go ahead and write every one of these fractions with the denominator of 100. So when I do the next one, I know I multiply that one by 20, so I'm going to multiply this one by 20. That's going to give me 80. Come back here again. I multiplied this one by 2, so I need to multiply this one here by 2. That should give me 58. Here this is 100. Well, I know I multiplied that by 4, so I'm going to multiply 17 by 4. So 4 times 7 is 28. Carry the 2. 4 times 1 is 4 plus 2 more. That should give me 68. That's an 8 there. Let me clean that up for us so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. Get my pen one more time. So we said this was 100. We said the top number was 68. All right, and finally for the last one, I'm multiplying them both by 4 again. So that's 12 over 100.